The quantum-cloaked scout ship hung silent above New Terra's verdant colony, its obsidian hull drinking in the starlight like a predatory shadow. Admiral Krellax of the Vortarian Imperium leaned forward, seven-fingered hands hovering over crystalline control interfaces that pulsed with soft, iridescent light. His exoskeleton, a living armor of silvery blue chitin, shifted imperceptibly with each breath, reflecting decades of military discipline. 17 standard cycles had passed since the Vortarian High Command had assigned him this seemingly mundane mission: observe and assess the human colony of New Terra. Most of his colleagues considered it a punishment posting, a bureaucratic exile for an aging admiral who had seen too many conflicts, asked too many uncomfortable questions about the Imperium's expansion policies. But Krellax knew better. The holographic displays before him shimmered with layers of data: topographical scans, atmospheric compositions, population distributions, technological infrastructure. Each screen told a story, but none captured his attention like the simple ground-level view currently projected in the central display. A human child played. Not just played, existed in a state of pure, unbridled potential that made Krellax's sophisticated neural implants pulse with an almost organic uncertainty. Emma Rodriguez was 6 Earth years old, though her movements suggested an intelligence that defied such simple numerical classification. She sat in a patch of golden-green grass that swayed with the gentle breeze of this terraformed world. Around her lay a seemingly random collection of objects: broken drone components, smooth river stones, fragments of crystalline data storage, wooden blocks worn smooth by previous play sessions. To a Vortarian observer, the scene would appear chaotic, inefficient, a waste of developmental potential. But Krellax had learned long ago that humans operated on principles that constantly challenged established galactic understanding. Where other species saw limitations, humans saw challenges. Where others calculated, humans imagined. The ship's advanced sensors tracked every microscopic movement. Each time Emma's small hand reached for an object, multiple predictive algorithms sprang to life, calculating potential outcomes, tracking potential trajectories. Most would terminate in microseconds, unable to process the child's seemingly random selection process. Most, but not all. Krellax had specifically modified these particular scanning algorithms. Algorithms that had been developed during his most controversial research period, a time when he had been branded a radical thinker by the conservative Vortarian military leadership. His research had focused on what he called adaptive potential, the capacity of a species to transcend its current technological and evolutionary limitations through pure creative problem-solving. Humans were his prime case study. The ship's environmental filters caught the faintest sounds from the planet's surface. Emma was singing, a nonsensical melody that mixed Earth languages with what sounded like invented words. Her voice rose and fell in patterns that defied musical theory, yet possessed an undeniable internal logic. Fascinating, Krellax muttered, his universal translator rendering the word across 17 different linguistic matrices. Emma's hands moved, not with the precision of a programmed machine, but with the fluid creativity of something alive, something fundamentally unpredictable. Each movement was a question. Each placement of an object was a hypothesis waiting to be tested. And somewhere in that seemingly innocent play, Krellax knew, lay the seeds of something the Vortarian Imperium was not prepared to understand. The communication array aboard Krellax's scout ship erupted with a cascade of digital warnings. Analyst Vrentok, his primary xenosociological advisor, began transmitting a series of increasingly agitated reports. Anomaly detected, the first message read. Child's constructive pattern defies standard probabilistic models. Krellax's mandibles clicked together, a gesture of deep concentration unique to his species. The holographic displays multiplied, each one presenting a different analytical perspective on the child's seemingly random play. What Emma was building looked less like a structure and more like a living concept. A drone component balanced impossibly on a curved stone. A transparent data chip leaned against a wooden block with a precision that mathematical models insisted was improbable. Each item appeared to communicate with the others, creating a language of potential that transcended traditional engineering principles. The Voltairean analysis algorithms began to fracture. First, one predictive model collapsed, then another. Within moments, entire computational frameworks were disintegrating, unable to process the child's intuitive approach to construction. Where Voltairean educational systems demanded rigid, mathematically perfect progressions, Emma moved with a fluidity that suggested something far more profound. Vrentalk's next transmission carried a note of professional panic. "Admiral, the child is not building. She is translating." Krillax understood immediately. Translation, in Voltairean sinological terms, meant something far more complex than mere language conversion. It was the process of understanding fundamental relationships between systems, of finding connections where none seemed to exist. Emma's hands moved with a rhythm that suggested she was listening to something beyond physical perception. A small metallic gear would shift, and the entire structure would adjust, not through calculated engineering, but through an almost organic responsiveness. The ship's most advanced sensors struggled to categorize what they were witnessing. Was this play? Problem-solving? A form of communication entirely beyond current understanding? Each time the structure seemed moments from collapse, Emma would make the most minute adjustment. A touch here, a subtle repositioning there. It was less like building and more like negotiation, as if she was in constant dialogue with the very laws of physics. Vrentalk's analysis team was sending increasingly frantic reports. Comparative studies showed that no known species, not in the current galactic registry, nor in historical archives spanning 3 million years, had demonstrated this level of intuitive structural manipulation. It's recursive adaptation, one report noted. She's learning from each potential failure faster than our most advanced learning algorithms can process. Krillax watched as Emma paused, tilting her head. For a moment, her eyes seemed to look beyond the physical world, as if she could see the potential variations of her creation before they manifested. The structure continued to grow, not vertically, not horizontally, but in a way that suggested multiple dimensional possibilities. It was becoming something more than a physical construction. It was a living hypothesis, and somewhere in the vast, cold darkness of space, something fundamental was shifting. The Voltairean Central Analysis Hub went into emergency protocol the moment Krillax's observation logs began streaming in. Massive computational arrays, each the size of a small moon and capable of processing quintillions of calculations per microsecond, ground to a near halt as they attempted to deconstruct the data. Dr. Lirasan, the lead synopsychological researcher, watched in growing fascination as the human child's construction defied every known scientific principle. Her tentacular appendages moved rapidly across holographic interfaces, isolating and analyzing each microscopic detail of Emma's creative process. "It's not random," she muttered to her team. "There's an underlying logic that our current models cannot comprehend." Emma's hands moved with a grace that suggested communication beyond physical manipulation. A curved piece of transparent material, salvaged from what appeared to be a broken data tablet, found its way into her growing structure. The moment it touched the other components, something extraordinary happened. The entire construction seemed to breathe. Not literally, of course, but the way the components shifted, redistributed, and realigned suggested an intelligence far beyond mere physical properties, where a Voltairean engineering team would require weeks of computational modeling to achieve such adaptive structural integrity. This child accomplished it through what could only be described as intuition. Krillax's ship continued its silent observation. The quantum-cloaked vessel's sensors captured every microscopic vibration, every near-imperceptible movement. Comparative databases lit up, cross-referencing this moment with every recorded instance of species-level cognitive development across known galactic history. The results were unanimous and terrifying. Nothing like this had ever been documented. Dr. Lirasen's team began running increasingly complex simulations, What if the child's approach could be translated into technological development? What if this seemingly innocent play represented a fundamental reimagining of how intelligent systems could interact? Each time the structure appeared moments from collapse, Emma would make the most subtle of adjustments. A touch here, a slight repositioning there. It was less like building and more like negotiating, as if she was in constant dialogue with the physical laws themselves. "She's not constructing," one of Lyrison's junior researchers whispered. "She's conversing." The Vortarian analysis protocols began to fracture. Their most advanced predictive algorithms, designed to calculate everything from stellar drift to interspecies diplomatic outcomes, started to break down. Where their systems demanded rigid, mathematically perfect progressions, Emma moved with a fluidity that suggested something far more profound. Krulax watched the emerging pattern with a mixture of professional fascination and growing unease. Humans had always been an anomaly in galactic development, a species that seemed to rewrite the rules of possibility with each technological leap. But this was different. This was something fundamental. This was potential in its purest form. The structure continued to grow, not following any recognizable pattern, but creating something entirely new. It was becoming less of a physical construction and more of a living concept, a three-dimensional representation of imagination itself. And in that moment, Krulax understood why some of his colleagues feared humanity more than any traditional military threat. The central holographic display in Krulax's observation ship transformed, pulling historical records about humanity's meteoric rise across the galactic stage. Compressed timelines flickered to life, demonstrating a progression that defied every known evolutionary model. First powered flight to interstellar exploration in less than 2 centuries. A feat that would have taken most species several millennia was accomplished by humans in what amounted to a cosmic blink of an eye. The Vortarian archival records showed a species that did not simply adapt to challenges, they'd reimagined them entirely. Take the global climate crisis of the early 21st century. Where other species would have collapsed, humans transformed their entire technological and social infrastructure. They didn't just solve the problem. They created entirely new paradigms of existence. Atmospheric restoration technologies, sustainable urban ecosystems, energy systems that worked in harmony with planetary cycles. Krulax's neural implants pulled up comparative analyses. The human approach was less about conquest and more about conversation, with technology, with environment, with possibility itself. Below, Emma continued her construction. Each failed attempt became a new avenue of exploration, where a Vortarian child would follow strict procedural learning protocols. She treated failure as a form of communication, a dialogue with the physical world. The ship's xenohistorical database began compiling a rapid-fire sequence of human innovations, the quantum computing breakthrough that emerged from a garage experiment, the medical nanotechnology developed by a team of researchers who were told their concept was impossible, the ecological restoration project that transformed an entire continental ecosystem using techniques no established scientific model could predict. Humans didn't just think outside the box. They seemed entirely unaware that a box existed. Dr. Rentok, the senior historical analyst connected to the observation mission, transmitted a personal annotation to Krulax's private communication channel. "They are not a species," the message read. "They are a continuous state of potential." The observation became more intense. Emma's structure now incorporated elements that seemed to communicate with each other in ways that defied traditional understanding of physical interaction. A piece of transparent material redirected gravitational stress. A broken technological component seemed to generate micro-adjustments that prevented structural collapse. It was less like building and more like negotiation. Krulax recalled the earliest human encounters with galactic civilization. Every established species had expected humanity to follow predictable developmental patterns. Colonization, resource extraction, territorial expansion. Instead, humans had proposed collaborative planetary management, shared technological development, open-source scientific research that challenged the very concept of proprietary knowledge. The Vortarian historical records showed a species that did not see limitations, only opportunities waiting to be reimagined. Emma looked up suddenly, as if sensing the distant observation. Her eyes held a depth that suggested she saw the universe not as a fixed system, but as an infinite playground of potential. And in that moment, Krellax understood why humanity represented something far more dangerous than any military threat. They didn't want to conquer the universe. They wanted to understand it. The structure reached critical complexity. What had begun as a child's play now resembled something between a scientific experiment and a living organism. Emma's creation defied every known principle of static construction. Components that should have collapsed under their own weight found impossible balance. Materials that should never have interacted began to communicate in a language of potential that transcended traditional understanding. Krellax's psychological team transmitted a cascading series of observations, each message more urgent than the last. Adaptive resonance detected, the first report read. Components exhibiting quantum-level communication. Dr. Lyra-san, the lead researcher, leaned closer to her holographic displays. Her specialized sensory tendrils, capable of detecting microscopic variations in electromagnetic fields, trembled with excitement and growing apprehension. The child was not building. She was translating. Translation, in advanced sinological studies, meant far more than simple language conversion. It was the art of finding connections where none seemed to exist, of creating meaning from apparent chaos, of understanding systems so deeply that one could speak their fundamental language. Emma's hands moved with a rhythm that suggested she was listening to something beyond physical perception. A small metallic gear would shift, and the entire structure would adjust, not through calculated engineering, but through an almost organic responsiveness. The Vortarian observation team watched in collective breathlessness as the construction continued to evolve. It was growing less like a static object and more like a living concept. Each component seemed to communicate with the others, creating a complex network that rewrote the very understanding of structural integrity. Comparative databases lit up across multiple research stations. No known species, not in current galactic records, nor in historical archives spanning millions of years, had demonstrated this level of intuitive structural manipulation. Its recursive adaptation, one senior analyst noted, her voice carrying a mixture of professional excitement and profound concern. She's learning from each potential failure faster than our most advanced learning algorithms can process. Krellax observed the subtle interplay of components. A piece of transparent material, likely from a broken communication device, redirected gravitational stress in ways that should have been mathematically impossible. A fragment of circuit board seemed to generate micro-adjustments that prevented structural collapse. The ship's most advanced sensors struggled to categorize what they were witnessing. Was this play? Problem-solving? A form of communication entirely beyond current understanding? Emma paused, tilting her head. For a moment, her eyes seemed to look beyond the physical world, as if she could see the potential variations of her creation before they manifested. The Vortarian psychological team began to understand something profound. This was not just a child playing. This was a species demonstrating its fundamental approach to existence. Each failure was a question. Each reconstruction was an answer. And somewhere in the vast, cold darkness of space, something fundamental was shifting. Communication logs from previous human encounters cascaded across Krellax's primary display. Each transmission told a story of a species that defied conventional understanding, a civilization that approached challenges with a creativity that bordered on the miraculous. The Vortarian archival records revealed a pattern that both fascinated and terrified the galactic scientific community. Humans described their greatest innovations as emerging from moments of play, curiosity, and imagination. Concepts that in Vortarian culture were considered inefficient distractions. Dr. Rentok, the senior historical analyst, had once written a controversial paper titled Cognitive Divergence: humanity's fundamental approach to existence. Most of his colleagues had dismissed it as radical speculation. Now, watching Emma's construction, those theories seemed prophetic. The child's structure continued to evolve. Each component seemed to communicate with an intelligence that transcended its physical properties. A broken drone part would shift, redirecting stress. A fragment of transparent material would bend, creating structural support where no support should exist. Emma hummed softly, a melody that seemed to carry its own mathematical complexity. Her hands moved with a rhythm that suggested she was translating something far more profound than a simple physical construction. The Vorterian observation team's most advanced neural networks began to break down. Their predictive models, designed to calculate everything from stellar drift to interspecies diplomatic outcomes, started to fracture. Where their systems demanded rigid, mathematically perfect progressions, Emma moved with a fluidity that suggested something far more fundamental. "She's not building," one junior researcher whispered into the communication channel. "She's conversing." Krulax understood immediately. Conversation, in the most advanced sinological studies, meant finding connections where none seemed to exist. It was the ability to see potential in the spaces between known systems. Historical records began to flood the display. The human approach to innovation defied every established galactic paradigm. Their medical breakthroughs emerged from interdisciplinary play. Their technological advances often came from seemingly unrelated fields crossing paths. The quantum computing revolution, developed by researchers who approached the problem like a complex puzzle, not a linear engineering challenge. Ecological restoration technologies, inspired by children's games that reimagined human interaction with natural systems. Emma's creation now stood as a three-dimensional representation of this approach. It was less a physical structure and more a living hypothesis, a conversation between imagination and physical possibility. The ship's sensors captured something extraordinary. The construction was no longer just adapting. It was anticipating. Micro-adjustments occurred milliseconds before potential structural stress points became apparent. It was as if the structure itself was learning, breathing, thinking. Krulax felt something unprecedented in his centuries of service. Not fear, not excitement, but a profound sense of uncertainty. Humans had always been an anomaly in galactic development, a species that seemed to rewrite the rules of possibility with each technological leap. But this was different. This was potential in its purest form. Emma looked up suddenly, her eyes meeting the distant observation point. For a brief moment, Krulax could have sworn she saw something more than just a physical reality. She saw potential. The transmission to the Vorterian High Command would change everything. Krulax's neural implants worked overtime, compiling the observation data into a report that would challenge the fundamental understanding of intelligent life. His mandibles clicked rhythmically, a sign of deep concentration unique to his species, as he prepared the most critical recommendation of his centuries-long career. Recommendation: Comprehensive Species Observation Protocol. The initial draft read: Threat classification: undefined. Threat was too simple a word. Humans represented something far more complex than a traditional military or technological challenge. They were a fundamental reimagining of possibility itself. The holographic displays in the observation ship reconstructed Emma's entire play session. Each movement, each subtle adjustment of her impossible structure, was analyzed from multiple dimensional perspectives. Quantum probability matrices, neurological development models, technological potential trajectories. Dr. Lyrison's psychological team had been working nonstop since the observation began. Their preliminary report was a masterpiece of scientific understatement. Subject demonstrates cognitive plasticity that exceeds all known developmental models. Recommendation: immediate and comprehensive study of human developmental processes. Krulax reviewed the comparative data. Humans had consistently demonstrated an ability to transform challenges into opportunities with a speed that terrified more established galactic civilizations. Their technological progression defied every known evolutionary pattern. The child's construction, now stood as a living testament to this approach. It was no longer just a physical structure. It was a three-dimensional representation of potential itself. Communication logs from previous human encounters scrolled across secondary displays. First contact scenarios, technological exchanges, diplomatic interactions. In each instance, humans had introduced something unexpected, something that rewrote existing understanding of possibility. The quantum computing breakthrough, ecological restoration technologies, medical innovations that challenged the very concept of biological limitations. They do not see obstacles, Krelax muttered, his universal translator rendering the observation across 17 different linguistic matrices. They see opportunities waiting to be reimagined. Emma's structure continued to evolve. Components that should have collapsed found impossible balance. Materials that should never have interacted began to communicate in a language of potential that transcended traditional understanding. The Vortarian High Command would not understand this report. They would see it as a threat, a challenge to their established view of galactic development. But Krelax saw something different. He saw a species that approached existence as a continuous state of discovery, a civilization that did not want to conquer the universe, but to understand it, to play with it, to reimagine its fundamental possibilities. His recommendation would be unprecedented, not a call for military preparation, not a warning of technological threat, but a plea for understanding. We are not observing a child, the final line of his report would read. We are witnessing the next stage of intelligent development. Emma looked up, as if sensing the weight of this moment. Her eyes held a depth that suggested she saw the universe, not as a fixed system, but as an infinite playground of potential. And in that moment, entire civilizations trembled at the precipice of reimagined possibility. The moment hung suspended between possibility and reality. Emma's creation, no longer just a structure, but a living concept, seemed to breathe with its own internal logic. Krelax watched as the final components found their place, creating something that was simultaneously a construction and a conversation. His ship's quantum-cloaked systems continued their silent observation, recording every microscopic detail. Generations of Vortarian scientists would spend decades analyzing these moments, trying to understand what could not be easily comprehended. The child looked up, not at anything specific, not with the focused gaze of a human child engaged in play, but with an awareness that suggested she saw something beyond the physical world, beyond the immediate reality of her backyard, beyond the constraints of her current existence. She saw potential. Krelax's neural implants processed the observation with a complexity that pushed against the boundaries of his species' understanding. Humans had always been an anomaly, a civilization that approached existence as a continuous state of discovery. But this was different. This was fundamental. The structure before Emma was no longer just a physical construction. It was a three-dimensional representation of imagination itself. Components that should have collapsed found impossible balance. Materials that should never have interacted began to communicate in a language of potential that transcended traditional understanding. Dr. Lyrasen's final transmission came through with a note of profound realization. We are not observing a child playing, the message read. We are witnessing the next stage of intelligent development. Comparative databases across multiple research stations lit up. No known species, not in current galactic records, nor in historical archives spanning millions of years, had demonstrated this level of intuitive structural and conceptual manipulation. The Vortarian observation teams had expected many things from humanity: military challenges, technological competitions, territorial expansions. They had never expected this, a complete reimagining of what intelligence could be. Emma's hands moved with a rhythm that suggested she was listening to something beyond physical perception. A small metallic gear would shift, and the entire structure would adjust, not through calculated engineering, but through an almost organic responsiveness. Krelax understood something profound in that moment. Humans did not see the universe as a fixed system to be managed. They saw it as an infinite playground of possibility. The child smiled. Not a child's smile, not an expression of simple joy, but something deeper, a recognition of potential that seemed to stretch beyond her immediate reality. And in that smile, entire civilizations trembled. The quantum-cloaked ship continued its silent observation, recording, analyzing, understanding that what it witnessed was more than a moment of play. It was a glimpse of a future undefined.